The year is 2019. A group of spectators watches a robotic arm desperately flails around in an attempt to contain a bright red substance. This robot has been doing this every day for 3 years straight, and at first it contained the substance in an almost gleeful manner. But on this day, it's clear by its labored motions that it cannot do this much longer. Eventually, the machine's creators come into the museum and unplug it, finally putting it out of its misery. Not long after this, a number of different videos showing the robot's final days started to float around online, and some of these clips went extremely viral, garnering literally hundreds of millions of views. For the next few weeks, this machine, which was dubbed the saddest robot on Earth, was one of the biggest things online, with people sympathizing, personifying, and even kind of fangirling over this robotic arm. However, it wasn't long before the veil was lifted, and people started to learn about the true nature of this piece and the artist behind it. As it turns out, this is not just a story of a sad, helpless robot. It's also the story of an artistic duo that have been dubbed as China's most controversial artists. A story that will also ultimately lead to the truth about this robot and unfortunately reveal an even darker intention. The piece was created by Sun Yuan and Peng Yu, two artists born in the early 1970s who actually attended the same high school together, although they were 3 years apart. The pair studied oil painting at Beijing's Central Academy of Fine Arts, again 3 years apart. But by 1998, the duo had both graduated from the college, and soon after this, they started working together on a number of different pieces. Luckily, they have a website where they archive their work, and on the bottom of the page we can see their earlier creations. These include exhibitions like Aquatic Wall and Civilization Pillar, and they generally include the pair doing bizarre things like embedding crustaceans onto walls, creating pillars out of human fat, and more. This is the reason that the duo became controversial so quickly. They were not afraid to use certain props that other artists would have otherwise avoided. Things like animal carcasses, human fat, and even cadavers were actually utilized in their earlier pieces. Some people found this to be abhorrent and unnecessary, while other people found it to be a great example of artistic expression. They have explained this in the past, saying that their work was about our relationship with death, the roles that we have in society, and the disconnect between our bodies and our feelings. In the 2000 documentary titled Beijing Swings, which is all about Beijing's controversial art scene, the art critic Vladimir Anushkak met the duo and talked about their controversial process.
大的感觉是，人的身体绝不能代表你的思想，就是绝不是代表你。然后我去找一个大夫，但是整个楼里都没有人，但是那一个楼都是放尸体的地方。
And then out came proof of something very unsettling. A living curtain of writhing reptiles and amphibians and crustaceans. It wasn't just snakes she'd strung up in a gallery, but everything that crawled.
这个材料是在北京你可以经常看到的东西，并且在那个夏天的时候，你去，我的想法意思是说，那个每一个人可能就和一个龙虾一样，在这个社会里面，在那个就从生命生出来到死，都是扮演着一个自己，都是在扮演一个自己。就是他必须要待在这个地方，从生到死，一直到他的生命结束。
This kind of flippancy towards the props they used was seen in one of their most controversial pieces, an exhibition that would cement them as China's most controversial art duo. In 2003, the duo showcased the piece Dogs That Cannot Touch Each Other. In this exhibition, they placed multiple different dogs on treadmills and encouraged them to run in each other's directions. Because they were tied up, they would never actually make contact, but they were still encouraged to try, hence the name. It's important to note that their owners were actually there. There was a medical team on standby, and the treadmills were not actually motorized. Still, when word got out, people were understandably skeptical and many people were disturbed. The Guggenheim Museum in New York City later tried to showcase this at an exhibition they had about modern Chinese art, and because they intended to include this piece, a petition was created protesting its inclusion, and it quickly garnered over 750,000 signatures. sculptures. Other people defended it, saying that it served a bigger purpose in the pursuit of their artistic endeavors, and this is essentially the conversation that has been happening for years in regards to the Juo's work. They explore the way we treat animals in everyday society, how meaningless our bodies are in terms of how they relate to our emotions, and how we view life in a different lens when it's placed in front of us in a certain way. In order to achieve these complex ideas, they believe this is the best way to do it, but it results in them utilizing animals and even people in a way that many viewers find disturbing. It doesn't seem to be as prominent in their recent work, but it certainly was a huge staple of their formative work, and after looking through many of these exhibitions, I think they'll forever have a hard time shaking off the controversial image that they created through their earlier pieces. With all that being said, a lot of their other exhibitions were just as interesting and weren't nearly as controversial. In 2007, they created a piece called Old People's Home, where they created 13 lifelike structures and sat them down in electric wheelchairs. These sculptures looked eerily similar to older versions of well-known world leaders, and it's been speculated that it's a metaphor for the incompetence of leaders around the globe, or that it's a reminder that even the most powerful men on Earth will eventually end up exactly like these wheelchair-bound sculptures, assuming they don't die before then. Of course, it could be both, but it's a very effective piece and it shows that the Juo don't need controversial props to get their point across. In my opinion, one of their greatest ever pieces is an exhibition called If I Die, and when you first see it on their website, it is a lot to take in and it's truly overwhelming. We see an array of different animals strung across a room. Robins, parrots, and crows don the ceiling while stingrays, cranes, and various other animals are closer to the floor, and in the middle of all of this, a woman is elevated in the center of this room. Like I said, it's very confusing at first glance, but it all makes sense when you scroll down a bit and see photos from an interview that Peng Yu did with her mother while she was in hospital. In this interview, she says the following: "If I die, I don't want to come back as some creature that lives on land. I want to fly, soaring the earth in the company of red-crowned cranes. How free would it be? Live wherever I want, land whenever I wish. Yes, maybe I will hold fish, because for a bird, fish can be both food and a source of wealth. I want to hold a wreath, bequeath my goodwill and aspirations to my offsprings. Wouldn't that be nice? After I die, my spirit will rise to a place like this." Soon after this, Peng Yu recreated this exact image. Without context, it is beautiful in its own way, but when you hear this interview and compare it to the piece, it adds a whole new layer of beauty, and from everything I've seen, this is one of my favorite pieces on their website. It is truly a unique, one-of-a-kind form of expression, and I don't think you'll see anything quite like it for a long time. We have covered a lot of their earlier material, and I hope you're starting to understand their process, their controversial methods, and their ability to create thought-provoking, expressionist art, because almost all of that was used in the piece I talked about at the beginning, an exhibition that would become their most popular work by far, and literally be talked about all over the world. Throughout their work, you can see glimpses of the Juo using technology in their art to express their messages. It usually wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of their work. An example of this is the 2009 piece that is literally called Sun Yuan and Peng Yu, where a circle of smoke repeatedly approaches a motorized brush. The brush wafts away the smoke the second it gets close, and this cycle continues over and over. It's said to be a metaphor for their tumultuous relationship, and it's definitely a simple but effective way of getting this message across. I only bring it up because it looks eerily similar in a lot of ways to the piece that we're focusing on. This was an exhibition that had a similar presence, but the reasoning behind it was a lot more ambitious. The Juo worked with 3 engineers from a company called Kuka to create a complex robot that had one simple task. It was an exhibition that was created for the Guggenheim Museum in 2016, and they actually have a write-up about this on their website that was penned by Zhao Yu Wang. Seeing as they are the museum who facilitated this piece, I will read most of what the description says so you can get an idea of what's happening here. It goes as follows. In this work, commissioned for the Guggenheim Museum, Sun Yuan and Peng Yu employ an industrial robot, visual recognition sensors, and software systems to examine our increasingly automated global reality, one in which territories are controlled mechanically and the relationship between people and machines is rapidly changing. Placed behind clear acrylic walls, their robot has one specific duty: to contain a vicious, deep red liquid within a predetermined area. When the sensors detect that the fluid has strayed too far, the arm frantically shovels it back into place, leaving smudges on the ground and splashes on the surrounding walls. They modified a robotic arm, one often seen on production lines such as those in car manufacturing, by installing a custom-designed shovel to its front. Collaborating with robotic engineers, Sun Yuan and Peng Yu designed a series of 32 movements for the machine to perform. Their names for these movements, such as scratch and itch, bow and shake, reflect the artist's intention to animate a machine. Observed from the cage-like acrylic partitions that isolate it in the gallery space, the machine seems to acquire consciousness and metamorphose into a life form that has been captured and confined in the space. At the same time, for viewers, the potentially eerie satisfaction of watching the robot's continuous action elicits a sense of voyeurism and excitement, as opposed to thrills or suspense. In this case, who is more vulnerable? The human who built the machine, or the machine who is controlled by a human? That is a lot to unpack, and we can tell straight away that this is a complex piece of work that covers a lot of issues and topics. It ran in the Guggenheim Museum from 2016 to 2019, and in those 3 years, the machine tried its hardest to keep this red substance in place. Over and over, it shoveled the liquid towards itself, and in the first year, it did its job in an emphatic fashion. The machine, of course, was brand new and well oiled, so the movements of the arm reflected that. When people walked near it, the arm danced. When it was left alone, the arm cleaned, and it did this in a smooth fashion with no resilience whatsoever. In the second year, the machine continued to clean and dance, although it slowed down a little bit. Recurring visitors were probably pretty used to the machine at this point and didn't stay around for as long, meaning there was less dancing and more cleaning. But the result was the same. The liquid stayed in the same spot it was always in. The only difference is there was far more splotches on the ground and on the wall, and the robot's movements were getting strained and labored. By the third and final year, the robot was a shell of its former self. Its movements were tired and forced, and its environment was a complete mess. Covered in the red liquid that it could not contain, the robot had failed the tasks it had been given, without ever knowing that it was impossible from the start to complete them. Eventually, the duo walked into the Guggenheim Museum and unplugged the lifeless robot. In the end, the robot couldn't help itself. The original run of this exhibition caught a lot of people's eyes, and although it was definitely up there, it wasn't necessarily the most popular thing the duo had ever made. After all, they had almost 2 decades of experience at this stage, and some of their work was very well known across China and the world in general. But in 2021 and 2022, this piece went viral online through various different posts. Specifically this one. It was made on the 9th of November 2021 by a musician named Cricked. In this post, he starts off by saying that no piece of art has ever emotionally affected me the way that this robot arm piece has. He goes on to explain the exhibition, saying that it's a robot that is attempting to save itself because the liquid keeps it alive, that the arm danced at the beginning but by the end it had no time to anymore, and that the arm essentially died in 2019. To my knowledge, all of this is a bit inaccurate. I can't find anywhere that says the arm was designed to believe it had to clean this liquid to stay alive, just that it was simply designed to keep the liquid in place. Also, the arm still did dance near the end of its time. The movements were just labored and strained. Finally, the arm didn't actually die on its own volition. It was unplugged by the creators. Despite the inaccuracies, this post made Can't Help Myself one of the most popular art pieces of the last few years. This particular post got 1 million likes, but a very similar post was uploaded onto TikTok that garnered almost 7 million likes. There are 100 million million views on this post alone, and countless videos that have millions upon millions of views as well. It was literally one of the most talked about things on the internet for weeks, and of course because of this, many arguments and debate ensued about what this all meant, with a lot of people tearing down the original post for its inaccuracies. Some of the criticism was valid, but some of it was a little questionable. This is one of the most popular takedowns I could find about the original thread, and it reads as follows. Ugh. This thread is BS and I'm annoyed. The robot isn't leaking fluid, it uses computer vision to futilely keep the fluid within an arbitrary zone. It's about automated surveillance and border control, not robot depression or whatever. I hate this kind of thread so much. It's not tired and hopeless, it's just clogged because it's been running for 5 years. It's all fine and good to empathize with the robot, but this piece is a specific statement about authoritarianism and automated state violence, and making stuff up is disrespectful to the original intent. Like I said, some of these critiques are fair, but in general this post is also filled with inaccuracies. For one, this piece never ran for 5 years, it ran for 3 years and was commissioned again after this, but there is no iteration of this exhibition that lasted for 5 years straight. It may seem like a small detail, but for somebody who is tearing down somebody else in such a pompous fashion, it feels like they should at least know the duration of the thing that they're talking about. Secondly, they actually link to the post from the Guggenheim Museum that we read, explaining the exhibition, and like we discussed earlier, this post directly says that part of the piece is to examine the ever-changing relationship between machines and humans, and that the duo's intent behind making the robot dance was to animate it, and in some ways personify it. So analyzing how people react to that is a perfectly fair thing to do. I only say all of this because this reaction and the original post say completely contradicting things, and yet in a way they are very similar. They both say things in a matter-of-fact fashion when they probably shouldn't. They're both filled with inaccuracies, and there's a slight air of pretentiousness around why they posted it. But the original post serves a much larger purpose. It put this exhibition in front of millions of people's eyes, it sparked debate and conversation, and if it wasn't for this post, I'm not sure if I'd even be making this video. This critique of the original post, however, does not serve any grander purpose. It's simply an unnecessarily confident response to a piece that does deserve more nuance and alternative takes, and it's a nice reminder to stay away from Twitter. Regardless of how you feel about this piece, your perspective and feeling towards it is not invalidated because of subtext. People saw a robot dancing merrily with fluid movements, maintaining its home and responding to the people around it. 3 years later, they saw that same robot, lifeless and dejected, struggling to perform the way it once did, and living in a box that was covered from head to toe with the liquid that once provided the robot its purpose. It is completely understandable that people would have a personal reaction to a machine that was personified. And although the creators may have laid out some different intentions, much of their work has been open for interpretation, and there are elements of this piece that still beg many questions. One of the most popular interpretations of this piece was that it symbolizes the monotony of everyday work life, how it sucks the joy and fun out of a person through forcing them to do the same task every single day just to survive, even though this same process will kill them a lot faster. With there being so many potential interpretations of this exhibition, I can see why it took the world by storm. Like much of the duo's work, it is a one-of-a-kind piece, and regardless of how you interpret it, there is one sound truth that cannot be denied. Eventually, there will come a day where we all can't help ourselves.